Hi, and welcome everyone to this Pulse Marathon Career Development Edition. We're excited you could join us today for Christine Assaf session, giving feedback how to effectively communicate to your employees. This Pulse Marathon features back-to-back live webinars delivered by expert speakers from the Pulse community. The sessions will be recorded and posted online after the event. You will receive an email letting you know when the recordings become available. My name is Noel Simiala. I'm a data professional based in Botswana in the southern part of Africa. I have a few introductory slides before I hand over the reins to Christine. I would like to take a moment to thank our presenting sponsor, Century One. The staging of this Pulse Marathon wouldn't be possible without the generous support, and that the reason this event is available for free of charge. If you'd like to learn more about Century One, please visit the sponsor page within the Pulse Marathon website. Our next Pulse partner webinar will be presented by Dell Technologies and will take place on the 30th of October at 5 p.m. Head over to the online events on the Pulse Marathon section within the main website and register for this event. Also, the Pulse Summit 2019 will be happening on the 5th of November in Seattle, Washington. So please head over to the pulsesummit.com website and register today. If you require technical assistance, please type your request into the question pane located on the right-hand side of your screen, and someone will assist you. The question pane is also located next to the Q&A. Oh, sorry. The question pane is also where you may ask questions throughout the presentation. So feel free to enter your questions at any time. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll read out your questions aloud to Christian. Yeah, you may also be able to zoom into the presentation content by using the zoom button located at the top of the presentation window. Please note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session, which will pop up at the end of the session in your web browser. Your feedback is really important to us so that we prepare for a future event. So please take a moment to complete this. This Pulse Marathon session is presented by Christine Assaf. Christine holds a BS in business management and has over 12 years in human resource experience. She received her HR certification at LSU and is currently a grad student in IO psychology at Colorado State. She's currently employed with Waste Management as the HR generalist for the Gulf Coast market area. And without further ado, here's Christine with giving feedback.
Thank you so much, Noel. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you to everybody for being here today. We're going to have a wonderful session about giving feedback. And just want to emphasize again, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to put them into the chat window and we'll get those answered for you as we can. So let's get started. So here's a little bit about what we're going to learn about today. We're going to learn about why feedback is important, a little bit about positive and negative feedback and the differences between the two, why we like those two. We're also going to discuss some formal methods of feedback, how we give feedback formally. And then we're going to just go through some best practices, some things that I've seen from HR, as well as what works in coaching sessions, what works in giving feedback to your employees. And then lastly, we're going to do some practice scenarios to really get an idea of what we can do better when we're giving feedback to employees. So first things first, let's do a little bit of a poll. Can we get that poll going up, please, Noel? So the first question should have been, how many of you like receiving positive feedback? 1000% yes. So it sounds like everybody likes receiving positive feedback. And that's entirely true, isn't it? We all like to hear when we've done something well. Well, let's do another poll result. How many of you like receiving negative feedback? Noelle, can we put that poll up?
All right, we seem to have 59% saying yes, 41% saying no.
Okay, so we have about 59% saying yes, 49% saying no. And so in some cases, it sounds like we prefer negative feedback over positive feedback. What I've often heard about negative feedback and the reasons that we actually do like to receive negative feedback is going to be because we want to know when we did something wrong. We want to know when we can be able to correct our actions. And if we're continually doing something wrong, how will we ever know to fix it unless we've been told? So in some cases, negative feedback can be bad and we don't like to receive it because maybe it's just not given up to us in the way that we want it. But for the most part, most of us, the majority of us, like to receive both positive and negative feedback. So why is feedback important? You've probably heard of this thing in the business world called employee engagement. And basically, if we were to define employee engagement, that would just be where an employee is willing to experiment, challenge, share information, support one another, go have that little bit of extra oomph in their job to be able to do what it is that they need to do to make it happen. And this is always a positive thing to have in the workplace because usually engaged employees are great employees. What we've learned, and from a Gallup poll that was done fairly recently, we've learned that engaged employees tend to be able to talk to their managers more on a regular basis. They feel that their managers are approachable and will allow them to give them feedback with any kind of question. And we can see this reflected here, where 54% that are engaged in the workplace strongly agree with the idea that I feel like I can approach my manager with any type of question that they need to have. So what does that mean? Feedback is important because it makes us aware of when we've done something wrong. It makes us aware that we can get better and at doing something. It also lets us know when we've done something right, so we're more likely to repeat that activity. We're a little bit no different than giving a treat to a pet. You know, if you give a treat, that little thank you and that little feedback and that positive feedback to us, we'll do it again. But feedback is also correlated to employee engagement. There's many, many studies, and I only gave you one, but there's many studies that prove this. Those who are engaged more tend to receive additional feedback. Studies show that environments that have a culture of reciprocal feedback have more engaged employees. So when employees feel like they can both give feedback as well as receive feedback in an effective way, the employees feel more engaged in the workplace and are more likely to do more work for you. We also know that studies show that engaged employees are correlated to better business outcomes. You will have more productive business, safer business, a more creative and innovative business when employees are engaged and feel like they are part of the workforce and willing to put forth that extra effort. So when it comes down to it, more feedback equals more money to you and more money to your business. So it's a really great idea to think about feedback, to understand feedback, and to create an environment and a culture where feedback is continually given and received. So let's talk a little bit about positive feedback. That was the one that we all were excited about, right? That's the one that we all like to receive. So here's a couple of things to know about positive feedback. The first thing is, as a manager, try to distance yourself from equating appreciation with money. I've been in these type of workplaces before, and I'm sure you probably have too, where you just never get that thank you, or when you do get that thank you, you just feel like it came out of nowhere and it's just such a wonderful thing. Hopefully a lot of you work in places where you continually receive appreciation and thank yous, but take it from some of us who haven't. It's a horrible place to work in when you don't feel like you're appreciated. One of the things that I had at a particular workplace that I worked for was I literally had a manager tell me, well, why should I tell everybody thank you? I pay them to do this work. Well, let's think about this for a second. If I can go and work at a place where somebody thanks me for the work that I do and I get paid, would I rather work there than at a place where I don't get thank yous and I get paid? I probably would go to the place where I get showed appreciation. And in today's current job market, where an employee can go pretty much wherever they want to, we have to fight for the candidates. And that means that we can't lose them from something so simple as being able to appreciate them when they do things for us above and beyond, or just in general. Sometimes jobs are tough and we just need to appreciate it. But let's make sure that we're not showing appreciation with the idea that we fear that we're going to have to give raises or give bonuses because we've appreciated them. This is just kind of a common human social thing that we should be doing. We also should be giving those thank yous frequently. They should be something that we constantly do. We should always thank you for giving feedback. We should thank people for staying late. We should thank people for going the extra mile or working long hours or finishing a project on time. Whatever the case may be, it should always be given as frequently as possible. And it should also be done proactive. I like to joke and call them the smash and grab thank yous, which is basically where you remember that you have to say thank you. And so you go and you say thank you really quickly, but you didn't proactively think about it. What I like to do is I like to carve out an hour of my week where I actually walk out on the floor, talk to my employees, talk to different people, and be able to just go around and say, hey, by the way, I never got to say thank you for this, but I wanted to make sure I got to talk to you. It's also just a wonderful thing to do as a manager, to be able to carve out time from your week, making sure that you're communicating with your employees. Now, no good presentation would be anything without an acronym for you to leave with, and I have two. The first one that I'm going to teach you is giving details like a star. When you give feedback, remember I said something about the smash and grab. Make sure you're giving feedback in a specific way. A poor way to give feedback would be walking up to somebody and saying, hey, thank you for what you did the other day. That was great. And then running away. Basically, what that means is you saw me, you forgot, and you realized that you needed to say thank you, but you really didn't give me any specifics. I really don't know what it is that I did. I just kind of have a brief idea of it. It doesn't come across as too sincere. Whereas you can give me feedback like a star. And giving me feedback like a star means you're first going to give me the situation I was involved in, the task that I was assigned to, the action in which I undertook that was positive, and the result that turned out really positively. So an example would be like, hey, Noelle, thank you so much for doing what you're doing today. You're helping me monitor this entire thing, and you're taking care of all these poll results for me. I really appreciate that. And so far, it's been turning out great, and I know it's going to turn out great in the end. And I just gave Noelle some really specific feedback as to how he helped me today and thanked him for that. Now he's more likely to repeat those actions because he knows that he's going to get that specific feedback again. So whenever you're giving feedback to an employee, always answer or give them feedback like a star. Also, be creative. I know sometimes we have situations where we can't do anything and everything for our employees. It'd be great if we could give our employees bonuses all the time for the work that they do, but sometimes that's not the case. But not all employees appreciate feedback in that way. Some employees don't like to be given positive feedback publicly, but time off, sending them to new trainings, allowing them to go and learn new and different things, sending them to the PASS Summit. Those are things that you can do as rewards. I once worked in an environment before where we had a hiring and firing freeze, where we were not allowed to be able to give any kind of raises or anything. And we really, this was during the economic downturn, so we really just could not do anything for our employees. Our CEO donned a sombrero, put on mariachi music throughout the entire environment of the facility that we were in, and started throwing chocolate bars, which are the payday chocolate bars, and the 1,000 grand chocolate bars, if you know which ones I'm talking about. And he started throwing them at all of his employees. Now, I wouldn't recommend throwing them, but that's what he did. And on the back of those chocolate bars was a little note message that was taped to it that said, I can't give you an extra one of these right now, but if I could, I would. Thank you for being a part of our team. Now, what I saw years later is I saw those little chocolate bars, even though they were eaten, the little wrappers saved on employees' cubicles because it meant something to them. At the time, they knew that we were all trying to work together as a team and get things going. Little creative ideas like that make a big difference to your team, especially when we're facing dire straits. But just in general, it's something fun and different, and it's something that you can absolutely do. It costs, what, $50 to get candy bars for everybody? So not a big deal compared to, having to try to worry about bonuses or anything like that. But make it part of your culture. Make it part of something that you do on a daily basis. You'll see it reflected back to you. Once you start giving a lot of feedback to your employees and a lot of positive feedback to them, you'll see them doing the same for you, giving you positive feedback as a manager, as well as to their colleagues and their peers. So definitely positive feedback should always be something that is part of the culture and in the environment that we live in, and we should encourage it as much as we possibly can. So let's talk about the next thing, and this is the thing that people want to talk about the most, is the negative feedback. Negative feedback this is the one that managers, Christine, help me. How do I give negative feedback in a positive way to my employees where it's effective? Well, let's talk a little bit about some just general rules. The first is anytime we give any kind of negative feedback, we're always going to research it. And what I mean by research it is we go to the data. And if you, most of you are probably in the IT field, you'll understand that data doesn't lie most of the time. And so the idea behind it is that we want to be able to really gain a good understanding of what happened here. If that takes looking at time cards, looking at code, discussing it with witnesses or other people who were involved in it. And really, this is where you take off your manager cap and you kind of put on your detective cap for a little while. And you figure out, what is the true situation here? I've been in HR for a very long time. I can tell you there's always about, two sides of every story. And it always is kind of in the middle is where the truth lies. So you want to research it as much as you possibly can. You also want to make sure that that negative feedback is always given formally. This should never be something that you do in front of a group, especially if you're doing any kind of correcting that you're doing to employees. Because the issue that you have with that is that then that employee is going to feel like you're airing their dirty laundry in front of everybody. And then additionally, you might face some legal implications with this. An employee can think that you're disparaging them, sharing their personal details of their workplace, and that could be a legal liability for you and your company. So you definitely want to make sure that any type of conversations that we have are formal. But what I would say is that you can never replace having a knee-to-knee conversation with an employee where you sit down in the office with them and you're really real with them and letting them talk. You don't have any distractions and you're able to really go through this. So I always recommend that it is done on a formal basis. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is counseling, coaching, and correcting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple of metaphors here. So when you think of a counselor, if anybody's ever attended a counselor, and I'm a big fan of taking care of mental health, so I encourage everybody. I think everybody should have a counselor. But when you think of a counselor, you tend to think of somebody who lies on who has a chaise in their office, sits with a notepad, and asks you how you're feeling. And that's kind of what we think of when we think of a counselor or a therapist. It's somebody who listens, repeats back what we say, and helps us to kind of unwind our problems and get us to a point where we feel like we can really understand what the root of the issue is, and we feel comfortable now that we can really be able to navigate the problem that we're facing a little bit better. That's what a counselor does. There are times in your career and as a manager that you are going to have to be the counselor, that you are going to have to take off that manager cap, sit your employee down and listen to them express their feelings, vent their emotions, and be able to help them navigate a problem. They may not want you to solve it for them. They may just want to be able to hear your advice, your opinion, and maybe some of your experience to understand things. So when we're faced with these situations where we're counseling, it's important for us to be able to understand where we're at with that. When an employee comes in with a problem, we tend to jump to problem solving, or we tend to jump to, well, why did you do that? Well, why couldn't you have done this? And instead, sometimes we just need to sit back and say, hey, is this something that you want me to solve for you? Or is this something that you're just kind of venting, you're getting some frustration out and you want to be able to just kind of get some advice on it? It's not a problem to take a step back and ask what it is that they need at that moment. I'm sure any of you have faced this in your career. I know I face it all the time, where sometimes they come in and they really just want to vent to somebody who will listen. And unfortunately, you're that person. Now, the next one is coaching. And if you've ever thought of a coach, if you're a fan of any kind of sports, football, soccer, baseball, anything like that, a coach tends to be a motivator. A coach tends to tell you, come on, guys, we can do it. Let's make it happen. They also tend to think in strategic ways. They start talking about, you do this, you do that. Well, how about we try this? And when things are going wrong or when things need to be adjusted, a coach comes in and they change the game plan. There's occasion as a manager that you're going to have to be a coach when you sit down with your employees, that you're going to have to motivate them, Tell them, hey, I know we can do it. I know you can walk through this. I'm here with you. I'm going to give the resources that you need, give you the additional training that you need. Also, we're going to make some adjustments so that we can adjust where you are, what you're doing, the work that you're doing, so that we can make it better for you and make it where you are. So understand that in some cases, you are going to be that coach. Now, the one that we tend to always think about when we think about negative feedback is we always tend to think about corrections or the correcting portion. Now, if you could think of a corrections officer or a police officer, what do? Well, they write you tickets. They correct you when you've broken a law or broken a policy or done something that you shouldn't have done. Now, that is definitely where you are going to definitely take off your manager cap and put on that correctional officer cap and say, hey, we have a clear guideline here. You violated it. I need you to not violate that anymore. And here's the penalty for violating that. This usually always is going to accompany some kind of formal process where you're actually putting a formal write-up, a document in front of them that says, hey, you messed up and we need you to not mess up anymore. So I bring up these three things because sometimes these three things can intertwine. Sometimes you're going to have to be one more than the other, but kind of always gauge and know where you are in both how you're reacting to feedback as well as how you're giving it, and understand your role at any given moment whenever you're sitting down and having to give maybe some negative or some needs improvement feedback here. Now, I said that we had one acronym. Now we have a second one. The second one is what I like to call the STAR-RR, the pirate star. STAR-RR, get it? So specifics are always going to be necessary, just like when we give positive feedback. In negative feedback, we're going to have to give a pirate star as well. We're going to give the situation, the task, the action, and the result that happened, the bad action and result that happened. And then we're going to give the alternative result. What you could have done was this. Here was the bad action, here was the bad result. But if you had done this, it might have turned out differently, right? And so that's how we give our STAR-RR, our pirate star, whenever we're giving our negative feedback. And you can write these down to be able to really understand what it is specifically that you want to say before you go into that coaching conversation. Now, the last thing that I want to point out is that while these are researched, we set them up formally, we write down how we're going to give our STAR-RR, our pirate star. The thing is that we got to make sure they're timely. We can't wait on these things. This shouldn't be something that pops up to an employee on their performance review and they never heard about it ever before. You should be able to give it as timely as you possibly can, as fast as you can, so that they are completely aware 100% of what happened. And it really shouldn't come as a surprise to them. They should be aware that this is coming because maybe we've had conversations around it, especially when we're giving that formal documentation, that formal write-up. And speaking of that, let's go into the formal feedback. Now, most of you probably may have a progressive discipline policy at your company. Some of you may be either in startups or small businesses that don't have anything. One of the big things that I would recommend is that your company have a progressive discipline policy that is written, that talks about how we have our conversations, what methods that we use, and it is something that it is available to any employee so that they understand how the process goes. Basically, most of these processes always have a formal, we first give a verbal, then we give a written warning, then we possibly do suspension, and then thereafter there's termination. But we always decide on what means we're going to use depending on the severity. So I think if somebody punches somebody else in the face in the office, they're not going to get a verbal warning for that. They're going to get terminated. But I also think if a person was late for the very first time ever, we're not going to terminate them for that. We're going to sit down, go over it with them, tell them, hey, we do have a requirement that you're here at 8 a.m. every morning. So please, let's make sure that doesn't happen again, so that we don't have to get into a situation where we have to write you up for it. So I strongly recommend that your company, your business, have a progressive discipline policy and that your employees are aware of it and it's very transparent for them. Now, one of my favorite things that I talk with managers about is performance improvement plans, or PIPs. PIPs are a very important tool that can be used within your HR and management life. And I think the reason for that is because I oftentimes have managers who will come into my office and they'll say, Christine, I have this employee and they're just not really cutting the mustard. I just don't know how to put it, but they're just not doing a good job. They're not doing anything wrong, but I just need them to be better. And this is where I say, let's pull up the job description. Let's go through the things that you feel like could be better, and then let's write a PIP. And a PIP basically outlines things that are in their job description where we need either better performance or we need them to stop being so negative on the performance that they're doing. And we just need them to have that extra oomph. And in it, we outline the things that they're doing, the things that they're not doing, and then the resources that we're going to provide to them and additional training that we're going to provide them to be able to get them to the other side, to improve their performance, right? Now, what I always tell is PIPs should be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. If you have a PIP written up by either yourself or your HR person longer than 90 days, it's not going to be legally enforceable. A lot of courts around here say that anything longer than 90 days is too long for an employee to be on a PIP. So make sure you kind of keep them under 90. And make sure you always have check-ins for all of your PIPs, where you have, we're going to check in on this date, this date, this date, and allow the employee to know where they are. Now, is the PIP a motivator? Not really. I've very rarely seen ever a PIP come across as something that motivates an employee. About 9 times out of 10, what ends up happening is the employee exits one way or another. They either quit themselves because they realize that they're just not meeting the performance standards that they need to be meeting, or they end up getting fired by the end of the PIP because they didn't meet the performance improvement plan, essentials that we needed on this. So what I always say is when a manager comes to me and says, well, let's go ahead and put that person on a PIP, I say, well, are you willing to have this person exit? Is this person somebody that if they exited, you'd still be able to progress in your company and you're okay with them exiting? If they're at that point, then we do the PIP. Now, why do that rather than fire them? Documentation, which is the 100% thing that your HR person and any company should 100% always have. Because when it comes down to it, when we do have legal liabilities, when we do have these touchy issues, or when we are living in an era where people can sue us for various different reasons, having documentation that we tried to work with this employee, we let them know what they did wrong, and we tried to correct their action and make them a better employee. Here's our guidelines on how we did that, is always going to be better than having nothing at all. What I always tell my managers is, you want me to be able to provide documentation to the judge rather than me to sit in front of the judge and say, well, the manager never ever even wrote them up. I don't know what happened. You want me in that corner. So I always say progressive discipline policies, PIPs, are always great to use. In addition to that, we often sometimes don't think as annual or quarterly reviews as formal feedback, but they really are. They can be admissible in court, so therefore they are very good for you to be able to use on occasion. But what I would also say is I'm going to echo back to what I said earlier, which is that I am not a fan of annual and quarterly reviews being tied to money. And here's the reason why. If you've ever worked in a state or government or federal, entity, you'll know that sometimes they do things where they give numbers on, how much, raises you get. Or for example, let's say you're the manager and your boss comes to you and says, hey, you've got $10,000 to spread apart to your 3 employees. Now do your annual reviews. Make sure, that anybody who exceeds expectations or meets expectations only gets, the allotment that you have is 10,000. That's it. Well, the problem is that's going to affect the way that you go and you do your annual and quarterly reviews. You may give your specific appraisals in a different way because you've tied it to I've got to only be able to give this much money. That's why I'm not a big fan of that. I feel like annual and quarterly reviews should be something that we should do despite any kind of money or compensation or raises that we're going to give. What I'm a big fan of, always give cost of living increases, no matter what, period. And then when the company is doing well and the company has the money to be able to give that to their employees, you should give that based upon performance, based upon projects, based upon things that they've done, and give them out bonuses and or rate increases with, that comes with, additional responsibilities. But when it comes to annual or quarterly reviews, I'm not a big fan of those being tied to money. In addition to that, annual and quarterly reviews, again, like I said before, they should not be a surprise to the employees on what they get reviewed on. If there's something negative that's received in an annual quarterly review or something that they feel like they need to work on, they should already know. They should go into that review feeling very comfortable that they understand where they are with you and that they understand that they've already received feedback on certain things that they're working on. So if you're in this annual review and your employee is completely caught off guard with the idea of what they've been rated on, then that means that we have not done a good job of really being able to give that feedback to that employee and let them know how they're doing. So let's go into some best practices. These are just little tidbits that can really help you, especially when we're talking about giving those needs improvement feedbacks. And I'm sure there's also some of you who have some of that dotted line syndrome, where you're not necessarily a manager, but maybe you're a team lead, or maybe you have to work with some people and you have to be able to give them feedback. And boy, that's just a dicey situation, isn't it? But in these best practices, you're going to learn a lot of stuff that are really going to be applicable to any conversation that you would have within the office, not just your direct reports. So the first thing is before we have any kind of conversation that we're going to sit down, have that knee-to-knee conversation and talk to an employee, we always need to prepare. I'm a big fan of writing down notes. I always say write down 2 to 3 things, only 2 to 3 things that you want to make sure are the point that you want to get across. The thing that you really feel like needs to be this is what we need to talk about. This is where we need to stay. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get into that conversation. Anxiety is going to rise for both you and the person on the other side of that table. And you're going to forget. We're going to jump down rabbit holes and we're going to forget about things. So always prepare, write some notes, so then that way you have that in front of you. Now, my favorite way to train how to have these conversations is using the interaction essentials from the DDI. I'm a DDI certified trainer. This is this model that you're seeing in front of you here is from DDI. You can look it up on Google to learn more if you'd like to know. But what you want to know is you want to know what your end results needs to be. And that's where we kind of have this circle. And we're going to go over it briefly. So the idea is we're going to open the conversation. We're going to open with the conversation and just kind of introduce what we're going to talk about. Then we're going to clarify. We're going to get some clarification on the situation, the actions, the tasks, everything that occurred in that situation. We're going to find out about it in that clarification cycle. Then we're going to go to develop. Develop is where we start asking open-ended questions. What is something that you could have done differently? Where do you think it all went wrong? How do you think that could have gone better? Once we get to that develop, and that employee starts giving us those answers to those open-ended questions, then we're going to get to agree. And what I say agree is where you want the yes or no answer. So instead, you're going to ask yes or no questions. And those kind of questions sounds like, so do you agree that going forward, you're going to try to do this? So can we agree that from now on, we're going to do it this way, right? And then once a person says yes, then we close out the conversation by summarizing everything. So we talked about this today. You agreed that you're going to do this. I agreed that I'm going to support you in that way. Are we good? Do we feel like we've closed this conversation? That's the cycle. And we keep on going until we make sure that we've got that understanding of everything, right? If we get to agree, but we still need some clarification, we'll go back. So an example of this would be, hey, Joe, I wanted to talk to you today about what happened with this particular project where the client didn't launch on time. So from my understanding, that particular project didn't launch on time because you were unable to complete such and such procedure. How do you think you could have done that differently so that we could have made sure the client could have had that done on time? And then Joe responds. And here's the thing. A lot of times as managers, we want to give them the answer. So it's very difficult for us to ask open-ended questions because we fear that they're never going to be able to know the right answer. That's where trust into your employees comes in. Your employees are smarter than you think, and they're going to give you the answer that you probably already have in your brain, or they may be able to give you an even more creative or innovative answer that you didn't even think about. So that's why we get into the develop phase. Now, if they're not giving you the answer that you're thinking about, you keep on going and say, well, I have some ideas and I have some thoughts, but I really would like to hear what you say. Now, it's very, very important in this develop phase to allow space for silence. Silence can be very difficult, especially in a webinar, but silence can be very difficult whenever we're doing this develop phase because we feel like we have to fill the void and the space and the dead air with our voices. But giving them that space to allow them to think and respond is very important, especially for any of my extroverts out there who are used to talking. Make sure you shut up and allow them to be able to answer the question. Then once we get to the agree phase, we'll say, oh, okay, that's a great idea. Do you agree that we can make sure that that happens, that you're going to follow that procedure from now on? Great. Well, now we've talked about this. I appreciate it. Do you have any feedback for me? I think we can close out this conversation. Is there anything else that we need to talk about? And that's the cycle that we go. Now, you may have noticed in this circle, there's some things on the inside of these of here. And you're probably wondering, what are these things? What are these things that are inside of there? And what they are is emotions. One of the things that I think that managers like to point out is that, hey, it's business, it's not personal. Or they like to say, you know, I check my emotions at the door and I come into work and I work objectively and I don't bring my emotions or anything personal in with me. Well, I guess what, everybody? That's just not true. Studies have shown over and over again that we bring emotions into work. We bring things like passion, happiness, joy, right? Those are emotions, but we can't just check out the bad emotions and only bring in the good ones. We bring in all emotions. We have frustration, stress, right? Sadness, all of these things, anger, all of these things get brought in to our workplace on a daily basis, and we face them every day. So it is impossible for us to separate negative conversations or positive conversations from emotion. We cannot. What we have to do instead is we have to acknowledge that they exist in the room. And this is one of those things that if you can learn the subtle art of acknowledging emotions without praising them or saying that they're bad, if you can do both, then let me tell you, you will get far in life, especially as a manager. I had a teenager that was shortly lived with me, and let me tell you, acknowledging emotions is a very important thing to teenagers. So what does that sound like? What does that look like? For example, with empathy emotion, that would sound like this. I can understand, I can hear that you're frustrated right now, and I can understand why you're frustrated. This is a very difficult conversation to have. So I've had difficult conversations like that. I've been in your shoes before, where I have faced, having to talk to my boss about some things that I was doing wrong. So I understand right now that you are feeling very attacked and very defensive. And I just want to let you know that I understand how you feel like that. Okay, so that is empathy. That is me saying that I understand it. And I also included some share. I shared a personal story about how I've been involved in that as well, right? I can also do things like esteem. Esteem is where, let's say we're in that development phase and the person says, well, I guess I could do this going forward, and it's something creative. You could say, that's a great idea, and this is why I think you're an awesome employee, is because you give great ideas like that. Let's talk about that. Let's work that out on that idea that you just gave me. In addition, we can also do support, where we can say, well, how can I support you in that if you want to do that idea? What do you need from me? What are the things that I can do? Do we need to have another coaching conversation? Would you like to meet up again in another week that we can sit down and go over this? And then involvement. Involvement is being able to allow them the ownership of solving their problem, which is why it's so important in that development phase to be able to ask those open-ended questions and allow them to be able to come up with the answer. Because really when it comes down to it is when a person gives us an answer, they're more likely to feel ownership over it, and then they will do it, rather than us dictating it to them. If we dictate it to them, we're just telling them what to do. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't like to be told what to do. So the idea is if we allow them to be the ones to give us the response and give us their ideas and their thoughts on what they can do, we're more likely to get that sense of ownership. So we're going to use the interaction essentials, which is this wheel of clarification, this wheel of how we're going to talk about the conversation. And then in addition to that, we're going to make sure that we're acknowledging emotions and that we're talking about them in the room. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the Oreo sandwich approach, or cookies, or Oreo cookie or sandwich approach. Now, most of you know what I mean when I talk about this. What I mean about this is we say something really good, then we say something kind of negative feedback in the end, and then we say something good again at the end. And what we hope is that this is going to make an Oreo cookie or a sandwich that we're going to feed our employee, and they're going to think it's just delicious. I like to call this the poo-poo sandwich. And the reason is because when you hear something good, and then you hear something bad, and then you hear something good again, what is the only thing that you heard? The only thing that you heard was the bad stuff. You just got fed the poo-poo sandwich, and you know what it tastes like. So I'm not a big fan of the Oreo or the sandwich approach, because also it comes across as insincere. Really, you want to give me negative feedback, but you're just trying to hide it behind this good stuff to try to make me feel better. But when it comes down to it, we really just need to be honest. Look, I'm about to give you some feedback that's probably going to make you feel a little defensive. You're not going to really like it. And to be quite honest with you, these are not my favorite conversations either, but we're going to get through this, okay? And I'm going to try to talk through this with you as much as I possibly can. So let's just try to be as honest as we can about this, rather than the poo-poo sandwich. Now, what are some ways to get around that? I'm going to skip the first bullet point and go to the second one. My favorite approach is what I call the broken record technique. And the broken record technique means that what I repeat most often is what you are going to take away from my conversation. So if there are 2 to 3 things, and I wouldn't recommend anything more than that, but if there are 2 to 3 things that you really, really want to know, then those are the 2 to 3 things that I'm going to work on. And those are the 2 to 3 things that I'm going to repeat over and over and over again. Employees tend to get very defensive in these feedback conversations. They're going to try to dodge all of these things you're throwing at you. They're going to try to say things like, well, what about this person? Well, what about that? And you just have to drive it back home, right? Right back to the infraction, going into that third bullet point. When they're defensive, drive it back. I understand what you're talking about with this person, and if that is an issue and a concern for you, we will definitely look into it. But what I would really like to get back to is I'd really like to get back to talking about the task at hand that we have right now and your particular actions that were involved in this, okay? And I know that's fairly easy to say to you as in a webinar, and much more difficult to do in practice, but I promise if you practice this more, it'll be able to become something that is natural to you. Now, going back to that first bullet point, whenever we're giving goals or whenever we're talking about what we're going to do going forward, we always want to make them smart goals. If you don't know what those are, you can Google it and look it up, but they're basically specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. And you can look up some more details about that. But basically the idea is that we just want to make sure that they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. We don't want those goals to be weird. An example of a bad goal would be have a better attitude. Well, what does that mean? What does have a better attitude mean? How do we put that into action, right? And if an employee says that to you, well, going forward, I'll have a better attitude. You have to repeat that back to them. You have to say, okay, well, what does having a better attitude look like? Can you give me specific instances of what that would look like in your daily work, right? That gets us to those SMART goals. You can have witnesses in the room for when it's possible. I recommend this definitely for when we're doing formal discipline, or if we're in these dicey situations where we're talking about harassment or bullying, or we're accusing management or the company itself of something illegal, and we want to sit down and talk with an employee about it. Absolutely. I always recommend your HR person being that person, but if you also have a colleague or your boss can come in and sit down and do this. However, I always tell my managers that I am not having that conversation for you. You are having that conversation. I will just be a fly on the wall and allow you to speak. All I'm going to be there for is just as a witness. And the last thing that we always want to make sure of when we're doing our best practices is to listen and to allow for comments. You should always allow an opportunity for your employee to be able to comment and give suggestions and give you feedback. In addition to that, when it comes to formal discipline, there are a lot of court cases that have thrown out formal discipline because there wasn't that little section down at the bottom of your document that said employee comment section. If there's not an employee comment section on your formal discipline process, I 100% recommend you put that in, because it's going to prove to whatever judge or jury that you did allow the opportunity for your employee to speak. And if they didn't write anything down on that formal process when they signed it, well, then that's on them. And then also it allows the employee to be able to give their side of the story. And sometimes they're going to feel that you're a more fair employer for allowing them to do that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some practice. And at this time, I think that we're going to open up some of the chat rooms so that we can make that happen. And we're going to go through a few scenarios. We're going to go through about 5 of them in the last 15 minutes that we have. So if we could get that going, that would be great. Got it. All right, let me open this up. And here we are. Okay, I see it now. Perfect, thank you. Now, we're gonna go through scenario 1. So, scenario 1, Philip has a bad attitude. He constantly gripes about doing his work. He never has anything positive to say about the company and only does as much work as he's required to do. In the chat window, what do you think, what action should be taken, if any? And I'm going to give you just a moment to answer. And I think, unfortunately, I am not seeing any answers. So Noelle, can you help me out with some of the answers that are coming?
Yeah, William says counseling.
Oh, okay, I see them now.
And then Joe Pele says regular catch-ups to decipher what is causing the behavior. Ahmad says we should ask for the root cause of his worries.
Root cause of his worries. That's great. So we do some counseling here. Yeah, this is probably definitely going to be much more of a counseling situation. Regular catch-ups to talk about what's going on with the behavior. Absolutely. And asking for the root cause of the worries. Absolutely. I think the idea is that we definitely need to sit down with Philip and find out, you know, has Philip always had a bad attitude? Has Philip just recently had a bad attitude? Maybe Philip has been on a project that he really feels like he's been on way too long and he's tired of it and wants to be on something different. Philip may be a go-getter and he feels like maybe he's doing work that is entirely too behind what it is that he has done before. So absolutely 100% we need to sit down with Philip, and we probably need to put a little bit of that counselor coach hat on at that point. I don't think that this deems any formal regulation. I don't think we're going to be sitting him down and giving him a write-up for a bad attitude just yet, not until we really feel like it gets to that point, right? Okay, great answers. Let's go into slide scenario 2. So in scenario 2, Rick has only been with the company for 3 months. He's a smart, great employee, except for the fact that he makes some careless errors on occasion. What action should be taken, if any? Give y'all just a moment. So he's been with us for 3 months, smart employee, but making careless errors. So let's see, we're hearing ask if he could improve and catch further errors. William said coaching, confidence building. Margaret said team him up with an experienced person. That's a great idea, Margaret. So yeah, absolutely. I think in this particular case, you know, this is a new employee. So we need to sit down and really kind of decipher what's going on. Maybe some coaching and confidence building. Absolutely, William. And teaming him up with an experienced person, great idea, but also how we can improve. He should be spoken to. He may be nervous about his job. Absolutely. And he might be telling us what's going wrong, but he's afraid to discuss it, just like what Joe said, right? We're new, and so sometimes we don't want to discuss that we don't know something because we're afraid that people are going to, think wrong about us, because of that. So in this particular case, I definitely think we need to sit down with him, have a kind of a coaching session here, and follow it up. So definitely going to be doing some coaching here. Also, Rick could point out to us that maybe our training protocol is not as good as we think it is. Maybe there's something that he's finding that we missed on how we train our new employees. So this is absolutely an opportunity for us to be able to get some feedback from Rick, as well as give Rick some feedback too. Okay, let's do our next scenario. Great answers, guys. Daryl gets into an argument with Merle in the office in front of a client, and the client has threatened to take their business elsewhere due to the negative perception. What action should be taken, if any? Give y'all just a moment. So boy, they're getting into an argument in front of the client, and now that client might go somewhere else. This is just, what do we do? Reprimand. Joe says to reprimand. Absolutely. William says correctional officer hat time. Sajad says unprofessional behavior, first step. And Margaret says take the client to a quiet room and calm them down and then address the people. Well, that would definitely be the first thing to do. Absolutely, Margaret. Yes, this may be time for a cause for the first warning. Absolutely, Joe. You guys hit the nail right on the head. Good job, everyone. I absolutely 100% would recommend formal write-up for this. The way I always look at it is if an employee costs me either money, potential money, did something that could damage my reputation, something that could threaten a client to leave me and never come back, then absolutely 100% I'm going to sit down with them and they're going to get some kind of formal write-up. This would be what I call a final warning. I would sit down with Daryl, I would sit down with Merle on separate occasions, take them both separately and talk to them and say, look, part of your job is being able to work well with others. That is everybody's part of their job. You are and you might not like Merle and he might not like you, but you guys are going to have to learn how to interact with one another. And if you can't, then you're going to end up not being able to work at this business anymore. And that's just the truth. My mom used to always make the joke that if we as kids couldn't decide who was going to sit in the front seat of the car, then both of us had to sit in the back. And this is going to be that same situation. If you guys can't get along together and figure it out on your own, then both of you are not going to be here anymore. So absolutely 100%, this is correctional officer time. This is when we put on that hat and we give them formal discipline and we make sure it's documented. Good job, everyone. Okay, let's go into scenario 4. It's annual review time and Glenn has been with the company for 5 years. At the start of the year, Glenn won Employee of the Quarter award and was doing very well. However, over the past 6 months, Glenn's performance has been uneventful. What action should be taken, if any? So Glenn's just been doing a great job, but just recently not doing good. So William says it's counseling, heart-to-heart time. Absolutely, William. I think this is time to talk. Sworn says that it's formal discussion time and maybe set a PIP. That's a good idea too, Sworn. Sajad says smart objectives set. A quiet chat to see if anything's the matter with the scenario, just like one. Find out the root cause, said Joy. Margaret said ask what's happened recently that would affect him. Stephanie said I would have a meeting with him, talk about the performance, see what's going on. Absolutely. I definitely think that we definitely need to have a performance before we get into any kind of formal discussion or any kind of PIPs. We want to find out what the situation is and what's going on with Glenn. A lot of times when we see a really great employee doing very, very well and then all of a sudden doing poor, there might be some personal issues going on. Is Glenn having personal issues at home? Is he going through a divorce? Is something going on with his kids? You know, we bring personal into work oftentimes. Also, you know, Glenn has been doing a great job at the company. Maybe we stuck him in a situation where he has been doing the same job over and over and over again for the past 5 years. And we've never really thought of Glenn as being promotable. And so now he's feeling like he's a little hurt that the company has never really seen his abilities and given him anything new to do. So again, we're going to want to sit down with Glenn. We're going to want to talk with him, and we're going to want to say, let's talk about your performance for the past 6 months. You know, what's going on? And then we're going to want to use whatever resources that we can use to really be able to make Glenn feel like he was heard, and that we'll give him the resources that he needs to be able to do his job even better. Great job, everyone. All right, last scenario. Michonne has been a workhorse. She successfully rolled out 3 projects before their due date and is working on an RFP to bring in a new client. The company is currently on a salary freeze due to the financial difficulty. What action should we take, if any? I'll give you just a moment to respond. William says to give her a new samurai sword. I think that he got that all my scenarios are from The Walking Dead, which I'm a fan of. I wouldn't recommend giving employees weapons at work, however. It's probably against some of our weapons policy. But what else can we do for Michonne here? Praise and recognition efforts for her, absolutely. Let her know that she's appreciated, absolutely. A public thank you, 100%. Maybe a training budget, absolutely. William, that's a great idea. Maybe we can't be able to give her any kind of salary or bonus, but maybe we have some training budget that we can send her to PASS Summit and allow her to go and do something new. Maybe we can put her as a project lead. You know, usually when we have employees who are really, really good at what they do, they love new challenges. So giving them some kind of new challenge and appreciation will allow them to, you know, to really feel like that we're investing in them as a company. So there's other creative ways that we can be able to give Michonne some praise and appreciation and feedback for the good work that she does. Absolutely, 100%. We don't always have to equate it to money. We really don't. So this was great, guys. Thank you so much for participating in all those scenarios. You all had wonderful answers. I appreciate that. Now we're at the end of my session. And so now I'll just go ahead and allow anybody to go ahead and ask any questions that they have. I think we've got about 6 minutes left so far. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, thank you, Margaret. Margaret said it was absolutely wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so Sajad came in and said, what would you suggest to make managers more consistent across the enterprise? I'm assuming you mean consistent across the enterprise for feedback. And what my suggestion would be is that it really does kind of turn into a top-down thing, doesn't it? In order for us to really be able to, as an entire company, embrace feedback and embrace the idea of giving feedback, we really have to make sure that we're having those conversations at the top level. If our CEO, our senior leadership team, all of the managers above us are poor in giving feedback and not trickling that down and not trickling how important it is, then it's going to be really difficult. However, if you work with your own team, you can always create that environment and that culture within your own team. So sometimes you really can make that happen for yourself. So you can always end up being the model, and then you can prove how fruitful it is and how much more productive and effective your employees are to that senior leadership team, and then maybe they'll be convinced to do that through the whole enterprise. Okay, so Joe has a question. With regards to scenario 1, what happens if they discover that the employee is just lazy? He is skilled and you don't want to lose him, but you can't get him to take accountability for his poor velocity. Joe, absolutely. I would think that once we get into a scenario where we've sat down, we've had coaching, we don't decipher that there's any personal problems or training issues, we really just feel like the employee is just not being productive, then that's when we probably need to sit down and actually put through a performance improvement plan. We need to sit down with the job description that the employee has, identify the areas where the employee is not meeting the benchmarks that we set for them, and then go ahead and set those benchmarks, and then sit down with the employee once we've written up the formal performance and the formal PIP, and say, we're putting you on a PIP, here's the benchmarks we want you to reach, we're going to review it with you 30, 60, 90 days, and then by the end of this we really want to see just a better performance from you. Because when it comes down to it, if an employee is just lazy and they're just not willing to do the work, then unfortunately we need to either have them exit, or we need to have them fired, or they need to go ahead and step up and meet those benchmarks. All right, Stephanie said, thank you. I have transitioned to a new environment and we are in a less professional environment. Oh goodness, well, you have a lot to deal with, Stephanie, but you're welcome, and thank you so much for attending the training. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close it up because I think we've got about 3 minutes left, and I know that there's one more thing that I think Noelle has to handle. So I'm going to turn it back over to Noelle.
Thank you, Christine, for a wonderful session. I too have learned a lot today. Coming up next is the next session will be relate and communicate, building bridges and connecting with others with Tom Kriya.
Oops, hold on one second. There we go.
All right, thank you all for attending. You can connect with Christine Assaf, the below links. I see here there is HRCT.
Right, at HR Tact on Twitter or on my LinkedIn.
Oh, yes. All right, thank you all for attending. And thank you, Christine, for a wonderful session. Yeah.
Thank you, Noelle. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.